you're a kind of anarchical social revolutionary that's directionless, except that you want to tear things apart, or that you end up depressed, which I see happening to students all the time, because the postmodernists like rip out the remaining structures of their foundations, of their ethical foundations.
So just to be really clear for anybody tuning in, your issues are absolutely not with someone who identifies with a gender other than their biological gender.
As long as they're not using that to promote a political agenda. But I don't care about the gender thing. I mean, that's
doesn't mean anything.
Well, it's someone. It's
a personal preference.
It's a personal issue.
Right,
you know?
personal issue.
It's a personal issue, and I would also deal with it on an individual to individual basis.
Because it varies just as much as there are extremely masculine men, extremely feminine women, and there's a broad spectrum of human beings in between, and each one should be dealt with on an individual basis.
Yes.
Based on what they want. But when you're talking about these made-up words, what it seems like is that some people are trying to push these made-up words and turn them mainstream. Now, the question is, what's the motivation behind that? Is this a necessary thing? Are there so many people that are of asexual or of some sort of... I mean, what would be a Z or a Zer? What is that supposed to be? Is that supposed to be a male or a female? Is it supposed to be asexual? Or is it supposed to be a nonconformist? I mean, what is it?
Well, it's supposed to be someone whose gender isn't specified, right? Who's neither male nor female, right, or maybe they say technically in the policy guidelines is anywhere or nowhere on the spectrum, and that's actually in the policy guidelines in Ontario.
Anywhere or nowhere,
right? And the nowhere, I mean, these are policies that are going to determine law, right? That within which the law is going to be interpreted. I don't even know what nowhere on the spectrum means. I don't understand what that means.
It doesn't mean anything. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. So you have, so here's the options, right? There's someone who identifies with the opposite gender of their biological birth. So there's a man, for instance, who identifies as a woman. Everyone's cool with that. Whatever your name is, whatever you would like to be called, whether it's Wendy or Mike or whatever it is, that would be the noise that you want people to make with their mouth that means you. That's it, right? Now, whether you're a he or a she outside of that, that's where things get squirrely. So third person is the only issue. The only issue is, like, say if we were talking to Jamie. Jamie just decided he's going to be Jamie now. He's still Jamie. Jamie's a girl's name, too. I know girls named Jamie. So he could be Jamie, and Jamie decides he's a woman. And now he wants to be called she. And we're like, okay, she. All right, Jamie, now you're she. But when it gets to, like, Zer and Z and the 78 different gender pronouns, it seems to a person outside of it, a person who's cisgendered, it seems pretty bizarre, and it seems pretty preposterous, and it seems pretty indulgent, and it seems like there's something else going on. And this is
that's the thing. It's the something else going on part that is what concerns me. There is something else going on. If there wasn't something else going on, a relatively obscure professor's amateurish YouTube videos on a relatively obscure piece of Canadian legislation wouldn't have had any effect, right? It would have just disappeared. But it didn't. And that's because there's more going on than the straightforward issue surrounding the pronoun use, and everybody knows it, or everybody feels it at least.
Well, what it seems like from someone who's outside of academia, someone like me, is it seems like you're pushing back against something that they are really trying hard to establish, and that it's some kind of control. It's some kind of control with how people behave and communicate. And it's not like a societal thing. It's a very small, isolated group of people that seem to be trying to indoctrinate others into their ways. And they're becoming very vocal and very angry and, in a sense, like verbally violent about your opposition to their controlling the way they that other people communicate. Yeah, well,
they don't like me poking holes in their ideology. And the post here, we could lay it out quickly. Okay. You know, because I've been thinking about how to communicate this properly. And so the thing about the postmodernists, and I'm going to speak mostly about Jacques Derrida because I'll consider him the central villain. Now, he actually they make a point.
Explain who he is, please.
Well, he's a French philosopher, French intellectual who became quite popular in the late 1970s and then was introduced to North America through the Yale Department of English. And of course, English literature is one of the disciplines that has become entirely corrupt. And so Derrida was a Marxist to begin with, but that fell out of favor because it turned out that Marxist political doctrine kept producing evil empires, and even radical left French intellectuals were forced to admit that by the mid-1970s. You know, they'd put their head in the sand for 20 years, 50 years really, thoroughly in the sand, and made sure their ears were full too. But by the mid-1970s, the evidence that that was the case was so overwhelming that even a French intellectual couldn't deny it anymore, and so they started to play sleight of hand with the Marxist ideas. So instead of trying to promote the revolution of the working class against the capitalist class, let's say, they started to play identity politics and said, well, we can just separate everybody into oppressed versus oppressor, but we don't have to do it on economic grounds. And so we can call it power instead of economics. So that was part of it. And then the other thing, but the fundamental critique that Derrida focused on, this is really worth laying out, because that the problem that he discovered, the postmodernists discovered, was discovered by a variety of other people at the same time in other disciplines. So, for example, among the people who were studying artificial intelligence, since the early 1960s, it was always supposed that we'd be able to make machines that could move around in a natural environment without too much problem. And the reason we could do that was because the world, in some sense, was just made out of simple objects. There they are, and all you have to do is look at them and you see them, and that's vision. And then the complex problem is not how to see or what to see, but how to act in reference to what you see. But it turned out that the AI people ran into this problem, essentially sometimes known as the frame problem. And the frame problem is that there's almost an infinite number of ways to look at a finite set of objects. So the fact that vision, for example, turns out to be way, way, way more complicated than anybody ever estimated. In fact, you can't actually solve the vision problem until you solve the embodiment problem. So an artificial intelligence that doesn't have a body can't really see, because seeing is actually the mapping of the world onto action. And so that was figured out more or less by a robotics engineer called Rodney Brooks. But what's at the bottom of this is the idea that any set of phenomena can be seen a very large number of ways. So like there's a bunch of pens in front of me here. You know, and when I look at them, my brain basically notes that they're a grippable object with which I can write. So I see the function. Like if you look at a beanbag, you see a chair. Not because it's got 4 legs and a seat and a back, but because you can sit on it. And most of what we see in the world, we actually see functionally rather than